to both rectify this injustice, but also ensure that no others who have come to the UK to live and work do not suffer in the same way as the Windrush victims?
Prime Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right to raise this issue, and it is what happened to the Windrush generation was a disgrace and a scandal, and we're doing our best collectively to make amends. And I can tell that I've met members of that generation, and this government is taking steps to accelerate the payments and to make sure that those who are in line with payments are given every opportunity, all the information they need to avail themselves of the compensation that they deserve.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister in respect for our servicemen and women, past and present, in protecting our peace? With regard to our battle against COVID, senior church leaders have this past week issued a call for prayer across our nation. The Prime Minister, I know, is very well aware of the persecution suffered by countless people of faith across the world for wanting to pray and manifest their faith. Will he join me in supporting our church leaders' call for prayer and in championing the universal human right of freedom of religion or belief wherever one lives?
Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the work that she does to champion that cause. And we all know that wherever freedom of belief is under attack, other human rights are under attack as well. And we will continue to work closely with like-minded partners to stand up for members of such marginalised communities.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in his comments about Jonathan Sachs? Can I also send all of our thoughts to those affected by the terrible events in Saudi Arabia this morning? Can I welcome the victory of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, a new era of decency, integrity and compassion in the White House? And can I also welcome the fantastic news about a possible breakthrough in the vaccine? It's early days, but this will give hope to millions of people that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Speaker, today is Armistice Day, and I'm sure the whole House will join me in praising the remarkable work of the veterans' charities such as Help for Heroes and the Royal British Legion. Like many other charities, Help for Heroes has seen significant drop in its funding during this pandemic, and they're now having to take very difficult decisions about redundancies and keeping open recovery centres for veterans. So can the Prime Minister commit today that the government will do whatever it can to make sure our armed force charities have the support that they need so that they can carry on supporting our veterans?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I echo entirely what the Right Honourable Gentleman says about Help for Heroes. It's a quite remarkable charity and does wonderful things for veterans. And in these difficult times, many charities are, of course, finding it tough. In addition to what the government is doing to support charities through cutting VAT on their cutting business rates on their premises and cutting VAT on their shops, Mr. Speaker, I would also urge everybody, wherever possible, to make online contributions to charities that are currently struggling.
I thank the Prime Minister for his reply. The truth is, the Chancellor's package for Forces charities was just £6 million during this pandemic, and that's just not sufficient. Can I ask the Prime Minister to reconsider that support on their behalf? Because at the same time, we've all seen this weekend that the government can find £670,000 for PR consultants. And Mr. Speaker, that's the tip of the iceberg. New research today shows that the government has spent at least £130 million of taxpayers' money on PR companies, and that's this year alone. Does the Prime Minister think that that's a reasonable use of taxpayers' money?
Mr. Speaker, I think he's referring to the Vaccines Task Force, and after days in which the Labour Party has attacked the vaccines task force. I think it might be in order for him to pay tribute to them for securing 40 million doses. And by the way, the expenditure to which he refers was to help raise awareness of vaccines, to fight the anti-vaxxers, Mr. Speaker, and to persuade the people of this country, 300,000, to take part in trials without which we can't have vaccines, Mr. Speaker. So I think you should take it back.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, nobody's attacking individuals. Everybody's supporting the vaccine. £130 million, Prime Minister. There's a real question about the way that contracts are being awarded, about basic transparency and accountability. And I know the Prime Minister doesn't like that. This is not the Prime Minister's money, Mr. Speaker. It's taxpayers' money. The Prime Minister may well not know the value of the pound in his pocket, but the people who send us here do, and they expect us to spend it wisely. Let me illustrate an example of the government's lax attitude to taxpayers' money. Earlier this year, the government paid about £150 million to a company called Iandel Capital to deliver face masks. Can the Prime Minister tell the House how many usable face masks were actually provided to NHS workers on the front line under that contract?
Mr. Speaker, we're in the middle of a global pandemic in which this government has so far secured and delivered 32 billion items of personal protective equipment. And yes, it is absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker, that it's been necessary to work with the private sector, with manufacturers who provide equipment such as this, some of them more effectively than others, Mr. Speaker. But it's the private sector that in the end makes the PPE. It's the private sector that provides the testing equipment, Mr. Speaker. And it's the private sector that, no matter how much the party opposite may hate them, it's the private sector that provides the vaccines and the scientific breakthroughs, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
The answer is none. Exactly. Not a single face mask at a cost of £150 million. Mr. Speaker, that's not an isolated example. We already know that consultants are being paid £7,000 a day to work on test and trace, and a company called Randox has been given a contract without process for £347 million. That's the same company that had to recall 750,000 unused COVID tests earlier this summer on safety grounds. And there's a sharp contrast between the way the government sprays money at companies who don't deliver and their reluctance to provide long-term support to businesses and working people at the sharp end of this crisis. The Chancellor spent months saying that extending furlough was, these were his words, not the kind of certainty that British businesses or British workers need, only then to do a U-turn at the last minute. Yesterday's unemployment figures show the cost of that delay. Redundancies up by a record 181,000 in the last quarter. What's the Prime Minister's message to those that have lost their jobs because of the Chancellor's delay?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect to the right honourable gentleman, he knows full well that the furlough programme has continued throughout this pandemic. It went right the way through to October. It's now going through to March. It's one of the most generous programmes in the world. 80% of income supported by this government. An overall package of £210 billion, Mr. Speaker, going in to support jobs, families and livelihoods throughout this country. I think this country can be very proud of the way we've looked after the entire population when we are going to continue to do so. And he should bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the net effect of those furlough programmes, all the provision that we have made, is disproportionately beneficial for the poorest and neediest in society, which is what one nation conservatism is all about, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must know that because the furlough wasn't extended until the last minute, thousands of people were laid off. And the figures tell a different story. Redundancies, as I say, record high, 181,000, 780,000 off the payroll since March. ONS saying unemployment is rising sharply. So much for putting their arms around everybody. The trouble is that the British people are paying the price for the mistakes of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. If they'd handed contracts to companies that could deliver, public money would have been saved. If they'd extended furlough sooner, jobs would have been saved. If they'd brought in a circuit breaker when the science said so, lives would have been saved. Let me deal with another mistake. The Chancellor's repeatedly failed to close gaps in support for the self-employed. Millions are affected by this. It's bad enough to have made that mistake in March. But 7 months on, the Institute of Fiscal Studies says the scheme remains, their words, wasteful and badly targeted for the self-employed. The Institute of Directors, many self-employed continue to be left out in the cold. After 7 months and so many warnings, why are the Chancellor and the Prime Minister still failing our self-employed?
Mr. Speaker, unquestionably this pandemic has been hard on the people of this country, and unquestionably there are people who have suffered throughout the pandemic and people whose livelihoods have suffered. But we have done everything that we possibly can to help. And as for the self-employed, Mr. Speaker, 2.6 million of them have received support at a cost of £13 billion. Quite right, Mr. Speaker. We've also, of course, as he knows, uprated universal credit. That will continue until next year, Mr. Speaker. He now champions universal credit, by the way, and calls for it uprating to be extended. He stood on a manifesto, Mr. Speaker, to abolish universal credit.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just doesn't get it. I know very well that the self-employment income support scheme has been extended, but the Prime Minister must know that scheme simply doesn't apply to millions of self-employed people. They've been left out for 7 months. And there's a real human cost to this. This week on LBC, I spoke to a self-employed photographer called Chris. He said to me, our industry's been devastated. There's 3 million of us that have fallen through the cracks. Our businesses are falling, absolutely falling, and crashing each day. He asked me to raise that with the Chancellor. I'll do the next best thing. What would the Prime Minister say to Chris and millions like him who are desperately waiting for the Chancellor to address this injustice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I would say to Chris and what I say to the right honourable gentleman and to the whole country is the best way to get his job working again, the best way to get this country back on its feet is to continue on the path that we are of driving the virus down. And I'm grateful to the people. This is a week, Mr. Speaker, since we entered into the tough autumn measures that we're now in. I'm grateful to the people of this country for the sacrifices that they're making. And I'm particularly grateful to the people of Liverpool. And elsewhere who are now taking part, tens of thousands of people in Liverpool, taking part in the mass testing work that's going on there. And it's fantastic news that we now have the realistic prospect of a vaccine, Mr. Speaker. But science has given us two big boxing gloves, as it were, with which to pummel this virus, but neither of them is capable of delivering a knockout blow on its own. And that's why this country needs to continue to work hard to keep discipline and to observe the measures that we've put in. And I'm grateful to the party opposite, grateful for the support that they're now giving for those measures. That is the way to do it, Mr. Speaker. Hands, face, space, follow the guidance, protect the NHS and save lives.
Let's head to Tewkesbury with Lawrence Robertson. Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we and all countries across the world tackle the pandemic, is it not right that we also have to secure our post-EU future? And aren't we doing that by securing help for our rural communities and indeed securing our borders?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I can tell him that the landmark immigration bill receives royal assent today, thanks to this House, paving the way for our fulfilling of our manifesto commitment to end free movement and have a new, fair, points-based immigration system, Mr. Speaker. One of the advantages of leaving the European Union, which the gentleman opposite would of course like to reverse.
Let's head up to Scotland to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister on the death of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks? And of course, this being Armistice Day, that we commemorate the day 102 years ago in the 11th hour of the 11th month when the guns fell silent, and all those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice in conflict since then. And of course, I would wish to send our best wishes to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in winning the election in North America, and look forward to the leadership that they will show on issues of climate change and the issue of fighting back against COVID, amongst other things. Mr. Speaker, the Office of National Statistics figures published yesterday demonstrate what the SNP have been warning about for months, that the UK faces a growing Tory unemployment crisis. It is now beyond doubt that the Chancellor's last-minute furlough U-turn came far too late for thousands who've already lost their jobs as a result of Tory cuts and delays and the dither that took place. UK unemployment has now risen to 4.8%. Redundancies are at a record high, and nearly 800,000 fewer people are in employment. To support those who have lost their incomes, will the Prime Minister now commit to make the £20 uplift to universal credit permanent and extend it to legacy benefits so that no one, Prime Minister, is left behind?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Scottish Nationalist, is now supporting universal credit because he was opposed to it at the last election. Yes, of course, that uplifting continues, Mr. Speaker, until March, and I'm delighted to say that the furlough scheme is being extended right the way through to March as well, and that will support people across our whole United Kingdom, protecting jobs and livelihoods across the whole UK in exactly the way that he and I would both want.
Right, let's return to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I respectfully say to the Prime Minister, the idea is that the Prime Minister tries to answer the question that's been put to him, and it is shameful that the Prime Minister still refuses to give a commitment to the uprating of the £20 to universal credit. And the SNP will continue to demand a permanent U-turn on Tory plans to cut universal credit. Mr. Speaker, another group who've been left behind by this Prime Minister are the 3 million people who have been completely excluded from UK government support. Since the start of this crisis, the Prime Minister has repeatedly refused to lift a finger to help these families. Can I say to him, in the run-up to Christmas, the forgotten millions will be amongst those who are struggling to get by and worried about their future? So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he finally fix the serious gaps in his support schemes to help the excluded, or will he make it a bitter winter for millions of families across the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, I hope, that we're not only continuing with the uprating of universal credit until next year. We've invested 210 billion, as I say, in jobs and livelihoods, but we've also just brought forward a winter support package, Mr. Speaker, for the poorest and neediest, supporting people, young people, kids who need school meals, supporting people throughout our society, throughout the tough period of COVID, as I think the entire country would expect. That is the right thing to do, and we will continue to do it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we continue to protect the NHS to help save lives, regional airports are playing a critical role delivering medical supplies and equipment across the UK. Yet, at Exeter Airport in my constituency of East Devon, overall passenger numbers are at some 5% of normal. Regional airports are facing multi-billion-pound business rates bills and are asking for a payment holiday similar to businesses in retail and hospitality, including supermarket giants. What assurances can my right honourable friend give East Devon's aircraft engineers, cabin crew and pilots that the government will look to temporarily scrap business rates so our regional airports can keep the country connected throughout this pandemic?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm sure my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will have heard his words. I thank him for what he said. He's quite right to champion regional airports and the aviation business. I can tell him that the Bank of England's COVID corporate financing facility is helping the support the airlines' current liquidity problems, with the sector drawing down £1.8 billion in support. And where also the Department of Transport is looking at giving bespoke support to particular regional airports in order, Mr. Speaker, to keep them going in these tough times.
Jonathan Evans.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mr. Speaker. West Wales and the Valleys received over €2 billion in direct EU economic investment during the 2014-20 multi-annual financial framework. This support will come to an end in a matter of weeks, yet the British government have yet to publish its alternative proposals, despite all the promises of not a penny less. When will he level with the people of Carmarthenshire and the rest of Wales that the British government are about to pick our pockets?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, the UK government is continuing to support all parts of the UK. Will now, as he knows, have the opportunity to fund projects with our own money rather than siphoning it through Brussels. And the quantum, Mr. Speaker, will be identical. And I can tell him that in addition, through the Barnett formula, the UK government has already given the Welsh government 2.4 billion in capital funding alone this year.
Mr. Speaker, whilst we are rightly focused on battling COVID, we should not ignore humanitarian injustices and the plight of persecuted minorities. On Remembrance Sunday, 82-year-old Mahbub Ahmad Khan was shot dead, the fourth Ahmadi recently slain in Peshawar. His crime under Pakistani law? To call himself an Ahmadi Muslim, whose creed is love for all, hatred for none. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that hatred preached in Pakistan ends up on the streets of Britain, and it is in the interest of our own security that Her Majesty's government should make clear to Pakistan that state-supported persecution must end?
Well, I agree passionately with my honourable friend, and I can tell him that is why the Minister for South Asia recently raised this very issue with Pakistan's Human Rights Minister, and we urge the government of Pakistan to guarantee the fundamental rights of all its citizens.
Unfortunately, we've recently seen the largest increase in Welsh unemployment for nearly 30 years. Now, the Prime Minister will know that the hospitality and event sectors have been dealt a heavy blow by COVID-19, but we cannot forget about the businesses in their supply chains. Many have not been eligible for grant support, and although welcome, bounce-back loans and the furlough scheme do not offer them support to cover running costs through the winter months. Will the Prime Minister therefore raise this matter with the Chancellor and bring forward a package that offers businesses in the supply chain some hope of seeing the spring?
Prime Minister.
He raises an excellent point, and one of the things that we're looking at together with local authorities and Welsh tourist authorities is ways of making sure that we keep a tourist season going throughout the tough winter months.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christmas is a time for joy and the celebration of hope. In Rother Valley, we have a renowned Christmas scene. From the Christmas Festival in Diddington, Christmas wreath making in Toddwick, the Maltby Lion Santa Sleigh Ride, carols at All Saints Aston, and even my own new annual Christmas card competition. There is something for everyone in Rother Valley. In this spirit of Christmas and giving, will the Prime Minister assure me that families and friends will be reunited and be able to celebrate this most important, happy and holy occasion as we usually do?
What I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that the more intensively we together follow the rules, the more we follow the guidance in this tough period leading up to the 2nd of December, the bigger the chance collectively we will have of as normal a Christmas as possible, Mr. Speaker, and get things open in time for Christmas as well.
Let's head up to Ealing North with James Murray. James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, a constituent emailed me about the track and trace system. Her family had received multiple calls asking for the same information, and there was confusion as the operative admitted they were struggling with London postcodes and local school names. Last week, the former Health Secretary, the Conservative Chair of the Health Select Committee, said that centralised contact tracing is always going to be less effective than a localised model. Will the Prime Minister now admit that the current outsourced model has been a waste of time and taxpayers' money?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're looking into the issue of repeat calls, but I think to say that the test and trace system has been a waste of time and money, which is, I think, what I heard him say, I couldn't disagree more, Mr. Speaker. This has been something that has enabled us to locate where the disease is surging, to take appropriate measures, and to allow people in huge numbers to get tested, more people tested in this country than any other country in Europe. I think the PCR tests that NHS Test and Trace have been conducting have been of real value in fighting the disease. And now, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we're rolling out the lateral flow, the rapid turnaround tests as well.
Let's head up to Yorkshire with Julian Sturdy. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, with yesterday's positive news on the COVID vaccine and the rollout of mass testing, and as York's virus figures continue to fall well below the level at which we were put into Tier 2, can the Prime Minister give York some hope to sustain our great city by clearly outlining the criteria under which we can escape immediately into Tier 1 from the 2nd of December? And will he also urge York Council to take up the government's offer of mass testing?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I urge York Council and councils across the land to take up this offer of mass lateral flow testing. I think it's a very, very exciting possibility. It's one of the, as I say, one of the boxing gloves that we hope to wield to pummel this disease into submission. The other is the prospect of a vaccine, and that is what we will do continuously throughout the weeks and months ahead. But I must stress that the way to get ourselves in the best position to achieve that, Mr. Speaker, is to make these current restrictions work so that we can come out well back into the tiers on December the 2nd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will doubtless recall meeting my constituent Ronnie Norquay on board his crab boat Carvela when he visited Stromness in Orkney in July. I know that Mr Norquay told the Prime Minister about the problems caused by the Migration Advisory Committee classing deckhands as unskilled labour. Since his conversation, which must have landed quite well because he was allowed back onto dry land safely, the Migration Advisory Committee has changed their advice so that deckhands are now regarded as skilled labour for whom visas can be issued. The Home Secretary, unfortunately, refuses to implement that advice. Will he put this Home Secretary straight on this one, please? Get it sorted.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. It's a subject on which I have a keen interest because I had a wonderful day on that, a wonderful morning on that crab boat. They're fantastic, prodigious quantities of crabs. They were selling to China, as I recollect. And I will make sure that the Home Secretary is immediately seized of the matter and we take it forward. But this is one of the things that we are now able to do thanks to taking back control, Mr. Speaker, of our immigration system, which, alas, his party opposed for so long, and his party, Mr. Speaker, would reverse if they could.
Neil O'Brien. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the introduction of the National Security and Investment Bill today. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when countries trample human rights at home and threaten our allies abroad, they shouldn't expect to be able to buy up strategically important industries in this country with no scrutiny, not least where they refuse the same kind of investments in their own countries?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, one of the many merits of the excellent conversation I had yesterday with President-elect Joe Biden was that we were strongly agreed on the need for the United Kingdom and the United States to stand together, to stick up for our values around the world, to stick up for human rights, to stick up for global free trade, to stick up for NATO, Mr. Speaker, and to work together in the fight against climate change, Mr. Speaker. And it was refreshing, I may say, to have that conversation. I look forward to many more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke for many of us when he took a call yesterday to congratulate President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris on their emphatic win in the US presidential election. So does the Prime Minister now have any advice for his erstwhile best friend, President Trump, whose continuing refusal to accept the result is both embarrassing for him and dangerous for American democracy?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I had and have a good relationship with the previous president. I do not resile from that. This is the duty of all British Prime Ministers to have a good relationship with the White House. But I'm delighted to find the many areas in which the incoming Biden-Harris administration is able to make common cause with us. In particular, it was extremely exciting to talk to President-elect Biden about what he wants to do with the COP26 summit next year, Mr. Speaker, in which, as you know, the UK is leading the world in driving down carbon emissions and tackling climate change.
Chris Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Armistice Day, restrictions mean that we can't mark the occasion with services as we normally would. However, in Hayward and Middleton, veterans associations are following the guidance to mark the day in a COVID-safe way. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, join me in praising them, the Royal British Legion, and indeed everybody across the United Kingdom who are doing their best to make sure that we can pay tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. And it was really impressive to see the way the Royal British Legion across the country organised COVID-secure memorials in the way that they did. And as we salute our veterans, I just want to remind the House that we've launched a new rail card for our veterans and their families, entitling their users to substantial reductions in rail fares, and we're introducing a national insurance break for employers of veterans, Mr. Speaker, in their first year of employment.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Kate to Learn. Kate to Learn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day there's a new story about dodgy contracts signed by this government. Research by Tussell, the data provider, shows that the government takes an average of 2.5 months to publish COVID-related contracts exceeding the legal limit of 30 days. Will the Prime Minister commit to publishing all contracts within the legal limit, and does he accept that failure to address this scandal mires his government's awarding of public contracts?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we publish all contracts, and quite right. But I would just respectfully remind the honourable ladies, I reminded the right honourable gentleman earlier on, it is absolutely necessary in a massive global pandemic to work with the private sector, not to scorn them or despise them, but to understand that it is they who make PPE, it's they who make the tests, and indeed, as I said, it is thanks to the researches of giant conglomerates, Mr. Speaker, giant conglomerates which they would break up if they could, that we have the possibility of a vaccine.
Andrew Salute.
On Armistice Day, as we remember those who gave their lives for our country and those who still serve, will the Prime Minister give a positive response to the Living in Our Shoes report to make life better for armed forces families? These wonderful people put up with more separation, moving of family homes, and worry about the safety of their loved ones than anyone else, and looking after them should be a national priority.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our armed services simply could not function without the support of their families, and I thank him for what he's doing also to raise this issue and for the comprehensive piece of research that he refers to. And we are making good progress, Mr. Speaker, in increasing childcare provision for armed services families, and also support for employment of partners of members of the armed services.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Order to ask the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government if she'll make a statement on the plans to prevent homelessness and protect rough sleepers during the second national lockdown. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we look ahead to winter months, it is vital that we work together to prevent increases in homelessness and rough sleeping. The Government has set out unprecedented support for this issue, dedicating over $700 million to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping alone this year. Our work on rough sleeping has not only been shown to be world-leading, but also to have saved hundreds of lives. We are dedicated to continuing to protect vulnerable people into this period of restrictions and through the winter months. We use the summer to work with local authorities on individual local plans for the coming months. And last week, the Prime Minister announced a Protect programme, the next step in our ongoing targeted support for rough sleepers. This will provide a further $15 million, ensuring that there is support in place for areas that need it most, and which will address the housing and health challenges for rough sleepers during this period of national restrictions. This is on top of the $10 million cold weather fund available to all councils to provide rough sleepers with safe accommodation over the coming months. This means all local areas will be eligible for support this winter, and it builds on the success of ongoing Everyone In campaign in September. We had successfully supported over 29,000 people, with over 10,000 people in emergency accommodation, nearly 19,000 people provided with settled accommodation or move-on support. We are continuing to help to move people on from emergency accommodation with the Next Steps accommodation programme. On the 17th of September, we announced ANSUP allocations to local authorities to pay for immediate support to ensure that people do not return to the streets. £91.5 million was allocated to 274 councils across England. And on the 29th of October, we announced allocations to local partners to deliver long-term move-on accommodation. More than 3,300 new long-term homes for rough sleepers across the country have been approved, subject to due diligence, backed by more than £150 million. We are committed to tackling homelessness and firmly believe that no one should be without a roof over their heads. And throughout the pandemic, we have established an unprecedented package of support to protect renters which remain in place. This includes legislating through the Coronavirus Act and to delays when landlords can evict tenants and a 6-month stay on prosecution proceedings in court. We have quickly and effectively introduced over $9 billion of measures in 2021 that benefit those facing financial disruption during the current situation. These measures include increasing universal and